I'm standing here in the chancel area of Middletown Christian Church in Louisville, Kentucky. For 20 years, I spent every single Sunday standing in chancels and pulpits. I've served in a lot of different roles. I've been a youth pastor, a summer camp director, an associate, and even the lead pastor, standing in places like this and preaching every single Sunday. That is until about 2.5 years ago. Nowadays, at least before the pandemic, I don't spend my Sundays standing in places like this anymore. I've been sitting here, in the pew, and I'll be honest, it's a little different. During this time, this new season of ministry, I've really begun to rethink what ministry really is. I've become convinced that the church, the system around us, has caused us to think of ministry as a position, as a title, when we really should think of ministry as a way of being in the world. Now, during all my years in pulpits, there was a lot of joy. A lot of great ministry happened, and I really felt called where I was, but there was also this underlying sense of restlessness, of something doesn't feel quite right. Now, obviously, no job is ever going to fit us like a glove. But over the years, that sense was growing and growing, that restlessness, until I got to a place where I realized that my whole career, my ministry, was not always going to be just bouncing from one United Methodist pulpit to another. Father Richard Rohr, in his book, Falling Upward, A Spirituality for the Two Halves of Life, talks about the first half of life being all about building the vessel that is ourselves, and the second half being about filling that vessel up. And the struggle comes when we realize that what it takes to build the vessel and what it takes to fill it are two entirely different things. For me, building the vessel looks like it does for a lot of us. Getting degrees, committing to a life partner and having children, getting ordained, all the stuff that you do. But I hit a certain point where I realized that continuing on in the solutions the system gives us wasn't really going to fill the vessel. Long story short, now I work for a nonprofit organization here in Louisville that is dedicated to ending poverty through education. My specific role is to run a web tool that helps people in need find free resources. And it has allowed me to have encounters and experiences that I never would have had when I was spending all my time in a building with a steeple on the roof. In fact, it allows me to be a kind of chaplain to the entire Louisville nonprofit community. One day I'll be hanging out with a guy who does facilities maintenance, and I'll be mourning with him because he's on parole and he can't attend his niece's funeral because it's across state lines. Another day, I'll be encountering a community college student who's a first-generation immigrant, struggling to find work to support his studies, and I'll connect him with another nonprofit whose job it is to connect young people with jobs and career paths. And my bishop even blessed this as an extension ministry appointment. And a lot of my friends in my annual conference have said, gosh, they're envious of what I get to do. Sounds great, right? Then why is it that a lot of days I really struggle to truly believe that what I'm doing is, in fact, ministry? Because I can sit here and tell you all about how God legitimately called me to the pulpit at another time, and now God has called me in other ways to do other forms of ministry. Why is that so hard? Why is it that it's so easy to articulate something up here, but has a really difficult time making it down here? I've come to believe that it's because of the system in which we were raised, the robe, if you will. All those assumptions that the institutional church has given us, all the promises it made, the structures it offered. Most of us have the titles and the positions that we have because we've done the stuff the system tells us to do, to get degrees, to to spend years in residency and trainings and sorts of things, and all that it gave us causes us to view ministry as a career, something in which you advance. And what's more, in the United Methodist Church, we have this strange conception of the relationship between the two orders of ministry, the elder and the deacon. I've heard it described this way, is that it's like two people standing back to back at the door of the church, and then the elder is looking inward, and the deacon looking outward. It's caused us to forget that diakonia, serving wherever, whenever, and however we find ourselves. We've forgotten that diakonia is not the sole purview of ordained persons that wear those diagonal stoles. It is in fact central, crucial to every single follower of Jesus, lay and clergy. I've come to believe that this inside-outside view of ministry, this ecclesial navel-gazing that we end up engaging in, is one of the reasons that mainline churches like ours are dying. And for those of us who have more of our careers ahead of us than behind, we're left to deal with the fallout. We're having to endure a liminal space, a season where those things that are at the end of their life cycle are starting to go away. Something new is on the horizon, but we're caught in between. And what's going to happen is that many of us, not all, but many, are going to have to figure out ways to be in ministry that don't necessarily involve a full-time salary and benefits. And I can tell you firsthand that it's scary. And sometimes it even hurts. A dear friend of mine, who became my pastor after I stepped out of the pulpit into the pew, took me out for coffee one day, and he patiently listened to all of my self-pity, wondering if I'd messed up, bemoaning that I couldn't shug the robe, I should be able to let it go more easily, and when I finally quit flapping my gums, he just said, "Matt, you couldn't have done what you did for as long as you did if you hadn't given yourself fully to it. So of course it's going to hurt when God calls you in a new way." He gave me permission to grieve. And I'm going to be honest, that grieving still continues. I'm convinced that one way or another, whether it's by choice or whether circumstances force it upon us, many of us are going to have to take off the robe. We're not going to be able to rely on the definition of calling that the robe gave us. We're going to have to rethink this whole thing and really begin to embrace ministry as a way of being in the world. Now, that's easy to say, but it's hard to do. It's going to be hard because you have been faithful. You've given your whole self to your calling, and things outside of your control have shifted around you. If you end up making some kind of vocational change, if the place where your paycheck comes from shifts, it does not mean you failed. You did not fail. It means things around you changed. The life cycle of those things we've been given is at its end, and we're caught in the middle. Valerie Kaur, who is a Sikh activist and leads the revolutionary love movement, likes to ask the question, is the present darkness that we are encountering, whether it be in the world at large, the church, whatever, is the present darkness we're experiencing, is it the darkness of the tomb or the darkness of the womb? Is the pain and uncertainty and darkness we're experiencing, is that the fallout of something dying and being done? Or is it the pain and darkness that precedes new life, something full of hope and light and possibility? I want to suggest to us that it is both at the same time. As the structures of the institutional church continue to crumble around us, many of us are going to have to, in fact, take off the robe and all the stuff it gave us. We're going to have to wrestle and redefine our calling and begin to embrace the idea of ministry as a way of being in the world.